but yes. So the next slide. So the Rotterdam Convention was first made in first merged with the Basel and Stockholm Conventions, and it was combined to form the BRS. So the Basel Rotterdam Convention. Then in 2018, it had 161 parties, including 158 UN member states, and 3 member states, including the United States. So the Rotterdam Convention supports these parties to exchange information on hazardous chemicals and their potential risks, including management of chemicals in international trade, proper labeling, safe handling, and informed restrictions and bans. And therefore, all of these parties share responsibilities and ensure that it is proper for all the product obligations. And so in the next slide, there will be the PIC. So this PIC is basically called the prior informed consent.
Now, the general command of the army is the control of the army itself, but the presidential.
Please mute yourself. Yeah, thank you. So Article 10 of the convention is basically talking about the chemical import listed in Annex 3 of the convention, which will be discussed later. And but they all have to be subject to this PIC procedure, which is import of certain hazardous chemicals. This is on the right side. And it's also the database of import responses. So as a procedure of the PIC, each party has to report to the Secretariat as soon as possible, and no longer than 9 months. After that, the decision guidance document is created for the chemical distribution, which is a response related to food import of the chemical for its safetiness, consisting of the final decision or if it's a response. So in the next slide, and I will pass on to Ayadi, who will introduce the relevant bodies of this convention and also introduce more details about the chemicals listed in Annex 3.
Thank you, Yoko. I hope I'm audible. So moving on to the relevant bodies under this convention, you have, first of all, the parties and their designated national authorities, which is the DNAs. These are now the countries and the regions with economic integration organizations that have ratified, accepted, or been accredited to the convention. Then you move on to the Conference of Parties, which is again the overseeing of the operation of the convention and makes decisions regarding the amendments in the convention. Then you have the Chemical Review Committee, the CRC, which is again a subsidiary body to the COP, which again governs designated experts and chemical management systems. Then you have the Secretariat, which again is in charge of making the arrangement for the meetings of the COP and all its subsidiary bodies, verifying that the information that is given and the notification that the proposals are correct. You also have the facilitation of information, which occurs an exchange between all these parties and fostering the collaboration in the process that occurs between all these bodies. And finally, moving on to the observers, which are again the United Nations and the specialized agencies or different bodies and agencies that are again observing the whole process and be part of the process with the amendments, etc., which are again the national, international, government, non-governmental organizations, which are again wish to be represented as observers to the COPs. Okay, moving on to the next slide about how the inclusion of the chemicals as well as the banned and restricted list works, which is again, these are listed in the Annex 3, which includes pesticides, the industrial chemicals that have been banned or just, or again, treated that are severely restricted for health or environmental reasons, either of the two. And again, move on with the PIC procedure. For now, we have about 54 chemicals that are listed under the Annex 3, out of which 35 are pesticides, 18 are industrial chemicals, and 1 chemical is both pesticide as well as industrial chemical. For each listed in the Annex 3, you also have the DGD, which is the Decision Guidance Document prepared, which is again the scope of the chemical subjects in the PIC and contains the basic information, which again talks about the inter alia in hazard classification, additional sources and information for chemicals, and again, possible alternatives. This also includes the Harmonized Commodity Description Coding System, which is called the HS. It is again an internationally recognized system for the majority of the goods in this international trade, which is again developed and maintained by all the World Customs Organizations, as well as the things that we discussed under the COP in the previous slide. And moving on to having the worldwide or identifying the traded products as well as the identified chemicals. I will pass it on to Shannon now for why the convention was adopted in the first place, as well as involvement of youth in the process.
I think I'm visible now and audible, hopefully. Thank you so much, Yoko and Ayadi, for providing some great background and detail to the technical elements of the law. I'm here at this point to hopefully provide everyone a little bit more context as well as to how did Rotterdam come about, where are we going from here, and how do youth fit in? So in terms of how Rotterdam was adopted or passed, maybe actually the better question to ask here is what would happen if we didn't have the Rotterdam Convention? So behind, as you all know, behind every hard-fought environmental law or regulatory action is usually a series of horrific and unfortunate events to either human health and or the environment that occurred that served as a rallying cry for legal mechanisms to prevent those cases from happening again or provide remedy if they were to occur in the future. So Rotterdam, as well as the Basel and Stockholm Conventions, were largely created to combat the legacy of countries that had banned certain substances from being produced, used, or disposed of domestically, and corporations as well within those countries, from being able to ship extraordinary volumes of those materials to other countries that lack the regulatory or technical infrastructure to manage those chemicals. So this largely resulted and continues to result in the transfer of ecological damage and human health risk associated with hazardous chemicals and wastes from global North nations into global South nations. So the Rotterdam Convention entered into force about 12 years after the Basel Convention in 2004. And I believe the Environmental Law Working Group actually has a presentation on the Basel Convention taking place tomorrow at 12 UTC, if you're interested. But both of these conventions, Basel and Rotterdam, as well as Stockholm, have interlinkages. Basel was originally drafted with a prior informed consent procedure, as well as Rotterdam that Yoko and Ayadi went through earlier. And Basel covers movement of hazardous waste between countries. Keyword there being waste. Rotterdam does not cover waste, as in materials that are being disposed, but rather supports countries in making informed decisions about importing chemicals produced for trade, in essence, non-waste chemicals. So together, Basel, Rotterdam, as well as Stockholm, which was passed later, are all intended to work together to help countries manage chemicals and waste from cradle to grave, so from production to use to disposal. Why is this so important? Why was Rotterdam adopted again? Whoops, here we go. Again, cradle to grave approach. Does this solve all of our problems with hazardous chemicals management? Once Rotterdam was adopted along with its sister conventions, have we completely solved the problem of hazardous chemicals and waste trade, specifically countries not necessarily being informed when they import these chemicals? No, these are not the end all be all sort of band-aid to the issue, that we don't have this occurring to this day, mostly because as our technological capability improves, between medicine and engineering, and our understanding of hazards changes and improves, there's always going to be new chemicals and new hazards identified over time. And then that brings us to the next point as well. The volume and types of chemicals being produced continues to increase. So that's why it's so important that Rotterdam and its other sister conventions continue to be updated to keep up with these new hazards, as they form. And this is just a little tidbit or taste as to, what we're working with in terms of chemicals and waste management around the world. So these facts and figures are from UNEP's Global Chemicals Outlook. This is a publication providing updates and trends on indicators for the world's production, use, and disposal of chemicals. And as you could see on the slide, it finds that global chemical production capacity has doubled between the year 2000 to 2017. It's expected to double again, in less than 15 years by 2030. And we're currently producing 50 times more chemicals than we had in 1950 around the world. There's an estimated 350,000 plus chemicals currently estimated in the global market. And it's worth it to mention here as well that a recent, within the last year, 2022 publication, it was titled Outside the Safe Operating Space of the Planetary Boundary for Novel Entities. It found that we're currently producing greater volumes and more new molecular structures of chemicals and mixtures than we currently have the ability to study the effects of and manage. So we've crossed the threshold for the planet to self-regulate chemicals and pollution. And this is why conventions like Rotterdam are so critical, to remedy the uncontrollable situation we have, and begin to, work to protect human health and the environment against this constant influx of new chemicals and hazards entering our environment. So when we look at the, the question, how effective is Rotterdam and what are some of the upcoming negotiations and decisions happening to make Rotterdam even more effective? So you might know that actually this week, the 2023 Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm COPs are beginning tomorrow on the 1st of May. As Yoko mentioned, Rotterdam.
Recording in progress.
Rotterdam, along with Basel and Stockholm, now conduct work and host their decision-making processes through the conferences of the parties jointly. So negotiations will include the listing of 7 new chemicals to Annex 3, as Ayadi went through the chemical listing procedure. Those 7 new chemicals are mostly herbicides and pesticides, and there's also asbestos, chrysotile asbestos on the list, which you may know is widely used in roofing and insulation, water supply lines, and is linked to lung cancer, such as mesothelioma. There's also a proposal to provide an alternative mechanism above and beyond Annex 3 for listing chemicals, and this proposal was put forward by Australia, Mali, and Switzerland, and it was subsequently co-sponsored by 9 other countries. As Ayadi discussed earlier, chemicals that are listed on Annex 3 impose a requirement on countries that are parties to Rotterdam that they first obtain permission from receiving countries before exporting those chemicals. So new chemicals are added to Annex 3 as long as they meet certain requirements set forth in the Rotterdam Convention and are approved at the conference of the parties by a consensus of countries. So since this listing operates by consensus, it's largely worked well for many chemicals, but sometimes this listing process has resulted in a jam where the Chemical Review Committee agrees that a chemical meets the criteria for listing, and a grand majority of member states want the chemical to be listed in Annex 3. But due to oppositions from some parties that prevent consensus, the chemical is stuck in sort of a legal or bureaucratic holding pattern. It is agreed that it poses unacceptable risk to global human health and the environment, but it's not listed. And as such, there's no requirement created for parties to follow the prior informed consent procedure for that chemical. So this new proposal maintains the Annex 3 listing process, but it creates an additional and alternative Annex 8, a new tool that will allow chemicals that meet the Annex 3 listing criteria, but where consensus was not reached, to be listed in Annex 8 by at least 3/4 or 75% of parties' majority votes. And then importing companies that ratify the amendment, Annex 8, will have access to information through the amended Rotterdam Convention, be able to assess risks and manage or reject import of that chemical, even if an exporting country has not ratified the amendment. So that this provides a path out of this holding pattern that sort of emerged for certain chemicals that could not reach consensus to be listed on Annex 3. And on the subject of chemical management capacity, now and in the future, it's important that we also discuss the role of youth, because this is a main reason why we're all gathered for this great series of environmental law sessions that are youth constituency focused. So there's two key reasons that I'd like to raise why building youth engagements in the Rotterdam Convention, along with Basel and Stockholm conventions, are one, that youth are one of the most vulnerable population groups to chemicals and waste mismanagement. Chemicals and waste conventions like Rotterdam, like Basel and Stockholm, other policy frameworks, including SICAM, the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management, recognize that youth are significantly vulnerable to hazardous exposures. This vulnerability largely comes from the fact that children and youth are often impacted by environmental hazards in different and more severe ways than adults, due to developing body systems, breathing in more air and drinking more water than adults do. And then it's also important to look at vulnerability from a geographic sense. So countries in the global south that we mentioned shoulder the brunt of hazards from global chemical pollution, including highly hazardous pesticides, also tend to have a larger proportion of youth in their population. And the second reason is it's important to look at youth as not just this vulnerable group that needs protecting, that are served by laws that non-youth delegates negotiate, but rather that youth are change makers in their own right, that we bring a lot of creativity and new ideas to the table in terms of how to improve environmental laws like the Rotterdam Convention. So it's important that the Rotterdam Convention is responsive to the needs and priorities of children and youth. And, historically, youth have not always been included in the development of global policy and actions to address these challenges. So ensuring youth have awareness, access to education, and capacity building measures and resources like this session today regarding chemicals management is going to be critical to the effectiveness of the Rotterdam Convention. And just to mention really quickly as well, since we are arriving at the 2023 Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions of the parties this week, you might be wondering, what does youth engagement currently look like in those COPs? So just wanted to make mention that, the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform, which is the mandated youth constituency to chemicals and waste processes within MGCY, and working within other processes in the UN system, like SICAM and Minamata. We recently mobilized an accreditation drive of 15 youth organizations to become observers in BRS. We have planned side events. We have youth registered that will be on the ground at the COPs and be able to share updates with the larger constituencies and take forward collective youth inputs through interventions, written submissions, and bilaterals. So we have a youth assembly prep meeting for the BRS COPs planned for this Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time that you all are welcome to join. You're also welcome to join our BRS discussion group within the platform, which is linked on the slide. And I also want to extend a huge thank you to the Environmental Law Working Group of CYMG that's convening this series of capacity building sessions on environmental laws, to be able to share information about the key environmental conventions with our youth constituencies. So if Rotterdam interested you, then I hope you'll also attend the session on the Basel Convention tomorrow at 12 UTC. And then there's also one on the Stockholm Convention on May 5th at 1420 UTC. So definitely hope to see you there. And thank you so much for your attention and being with us to learn about the Rotterdam Convention today.